Well, folks, we are here. Finally, the moment you have all waited for, the beginning of Season 7 of Law Candor. For those of you who may be new to the show, Law Candor is the podcast wholly devoted to pursuing the legal technology revolution. I'm Rob Hellewell, and I'm here with my co-host, Bill Mariano. And again, welcome back to the show. We're happy to have you. And this season is going to be a little bit different. It's a little special. In celebration of Women's History Month, this season we'll be bringing a completely all-female cast of thought leaders and innovators as our guest speakers. And not only that, we'll be talking about industry hot topics, but we're also going to have our guests share some practical advice for other women leaders in our space. We are excited to get to our first speaker, but before we do that, we will go on with one of our favorite portions of the show,
Sightings of Radical Brilliance.
And as the name implies, this is the part of the show where we bring you the latest news around innovation and other acts of sheer genius. Bill, what have we got today?
Today we're going to talk about biometrics. I've been hearing about this for a while, but Aratek just introduced their high accuracy biometric scanner, and it is actually available now. You might wonder, how is this related to legal technology? Well, think about it. What's more personally identifiable than biometrics? And if companies are going to start keeping this, they're also going to have to figure out a way to protect it.
Yeah, and you could think that, like I personally have not seen a matter yet that involved, biometric identification as part of the evidence, but it can't be far off. I mean, every time you're logging onto your computer, depending on what kind of a computer you use, or you're accessing, a data center or whatever it is that you use a fingerprint for in this case, clearly that is going to become relevant in a matter, and I'm sure it hasn't in others already.
It's going to be interesting because this is the type of thing that, whether you could see a nefarious use for it now or how this could hurt down the road, if a company is keeping your fingerprint on file from a biometric perspective, that is essentially a password to anything and all things you. So protecting that, auditing it, making sure it's protected, making sure that if you experience a breach that was not hacked and compromised is going to be huge. And I do think we're going to start to see it in, as specifically referenced as companies start to respond to DSARs.
It is. I mean, it just doesn't get much more personal than that. And I do think that it actually has come up now that I think of it, like in the federal government OPM breach, where a lot of fingerprint data was stolen. I think there was an affirmative, introduction of evidence that maybe, as some kind of an alibi because, their fingerprint information had been stolen. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah, we've come a long way from Beverly Hills Cop, where Eddie Murphy was stealing and lifting fingerprints with Scotch tape. But yeah, the future is here. It's going to be interesting to see how companies that are using biometrics to identify individuals protect that data to ensure that we can trust it, right? Otherwise, why are we putting our fingerprints out there? Is it just for quicker access? I'd rather use a password. But anyway, interesting times. Another interesting concept. Let's keep an eye on this space. Now we are going to get to our guest speaker. And she is one of our absolutely favorite people. Her name is Stacey Ibarra. She is the Vice President of Marketing and the Executive Sponsor of Women and Diversity Employee Resource Groups at Lighthouse. And she's going to share with us some of her thoughts around diverse hiring practices and how they can lead to a more innovative eDiscovery workforce. This was a great interview. Always exciting to have Stacey around with us and share her thoughts. I think you guys are going to enjoy it. Enjoy the episode. Here today to join us to talk about diversity in eDiscovery, how diverse hiring practices lead to a more innovative workforce, is one of our favorite people. Often when people say to me, what is it that separates Lighthouse from the rest of the companies in the eDiscovery space, I say our relationship with Microsoft, our innovation around analytics, and our marketing team. That's a top-down thing that's come from the person that we're about to have, Stacey Ibarra. Stacey, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. You kept writing in and asking, when can I be on? When can I be on? When can I be on? Finally, I was just like, oh my God, Rob, can we just have her on already? It's enough.
I know.
So, Stacey, we've been asking this question in the last couple of seasons because usually, it used to be like, hey, can you introduce yourself? And people would say, hi, I'm Bill Mariano. I'm Vice President at Lighthouse. And that's about as boring as you could possibly be. What we find interesting, though, is how people got to this space. Nobody went to college to say, I want to be in the eDiscovery space, right? Most of us weren't, this wasn't even an industry when we were in college. So can you give us a background on how you ended up in this space?
Sure. So I've been in the technology industry for most of my career. My connection to eDiscovery really came through Brian McManus, who's the CEO at Lighthouse. We worked together about 16, 17 years ago at a technology company called InfoSpace. I don't know if any of you have heard of InfoSpace, but back then we didn't work directly. I didn't work directly for him, but we worked together and on some projects. And he left InfoSpace well before I did, but we kept in touch. We had, coffee from time to time, and he'd picked my brain on marketing for this new company that he was talking about called Lighthouse eDiscovery. And so I learned a little bit about it. Then years later, when the company I was working for decided to move their headquarters from Seattle to Dallas, he called me and wanted to talk about an opportunity in eDiscovery.
So you knew McManus and you still came here. Wow.
I did. It's actually a funny story, though, because he had been at the time I was working on hiring my replacement in Dallas at the company I was working for, and really busy, traveling a ton. And he had reached out to me a couple times, and I actually had kind of put him off, just saying, I don't have time to meet with you, Brian.
He's a stalker. He's a stalker.
And so one of our mutual friends and a mentor of mine texted me and said, you really should have lunch with Brian. So I had lunch with him and we started talking more about the opportunity in eDiscovery. And it was really interesting to me to be in an industry that was growing as quickly as it is. And that is, where I could really put a mark in terms of making some changes different than, doing things differently than other companies are doing. So it was an exciting challenge for me.
It's interesting that it's the one thing that all of us on this podcast now have in common. It was a meal with Brian McManus that set us on the path of joining Lighthouse. So that's great. And Stacey, maybe just to set the stage for our listeners a little bit, there are a lot of good reasons for a company to focus on diversity and inclusion. But I think one thing that might be really interesting is what do you see as the link between diversity and then innovation in eDiscovery for a company?
Yeah, I've really seen this firsthand, how diverse teams and companies, it helps us make better decisions. There are so many aspects to diversity. There's, that come to mind, there's age, gender, ethnicity, race, sexual orientation. But I think also, another thing that we often don't think about is really diversity of experiences and diversity of thought. So one example that I can point to is our executive team at Lighthouse. We've got 4 women, 2 women of color, including myself, which is impressive. But more the concept of this diversity of thought that I was talking about, really having a good mix of legal industry experience, but also having that mix of technology and business experience. It just makes our team so much stronger and helps us drive innovation, foster creativity and help us just guide business strategies. This having more voices that are at the table to lead new ideas, new services, products. It really helps us encourage out of the box thinking. So I think it's a direct connection to having a diverse team. And so that's, I spoke about our executive team, but I think going all the way down from executive team below, it can just really help differentiate companies in terms of being different and sparking new ideas and new innovations.
So let's expand on that. What are some of the ways it directly impacts organizations, having a sort of the diversity of thought, the diversity in experience?
Yeah, there have been actually so many studies that I've read over the years that talk specifically about this, the relationship between diversity and innovation. One that as I was kind of thinking about this and what I would say, I was looking at a few over the weekend, and, there's a Harvard business study it's famous. It's been out for a while that has talked about diversity in companies. And some of the statistics that came out of that study were that companies with the average, diversity had both 19% higher innovation and revenues and 9% higher profit margins. Similarly, there was a McKinsey report that came out called Diversity Matters that found that the top quartile of racial and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to have financial returns above their industry counterparts. So there are real quantitative results from having diverse workforce. The other thing that I would point to beyond just kind of innovation is about, well, it's connected, but it's around talent and retention. And it all builds on itself. So when you have a diverse workforce, you help attract that top talent. And the trends that we're seeing now is that about 2/3 of job seekers are looking for workplaces that have that diversity. And so I think the key here is that top talent go to places that do better with diversity. And this is what will help drive firms to outperform their peers.
I love that. I love that stat. That's phenomenal. I mean, you attract what you're looking for, right?
Exactly.
That's great.
Yeah. And Stacey, I know from experience that you lead with empathy and inclusion, and that's always been very important for you. When you come to a new organization like Lighthouse, and I know it's been a few years, like what do you do to make sure that, the company is able to pursue that and to make these really important changes?
Leading with empathy is so important. It's just been something that I've always tried to do. I think, and you can lead with empathy. The one thing I'll say is you don't have to be a leader like in an organization to lead with empathy. You can lead with empathy across teams. Even going back to when I talked about Brian McManus recruiting me here.
Stalking
you.
Right,
Yes, yes. That was 16, 17 years ago. I was at a much different level than I was, and I did not work for him directly. I worked across teams. And so when you're able to kind of have that sense of empathy and how you treat others and how you work within teams and with peers, it gets noticed. And so, like I said, not that Brian stalked me, but I did not work super closely with him. He saw from afar. So I think wherever you are in an organization, you can show that. But so being a good team leader, it includes good listening skills, treating people with respect, and really letting everybody bring their best abilities to the table. I think that's really important. When I've seen it not work is when, that doesn't happen and people feel disempowered. They feel emotionally disengaged from the overall mission. So that's why I think it's so important. And then just personally for me as a woman, particularly as a woman of color, I've had to face barriers over my 26 plus year career that many of you have faced as well, as I'm sure. But I've had to really hone in on those leadership skills from a place of empathy to get to a better sense of conflict resolution more quickly, to be able to just work across organizations. So I think it's important. It was important for me in my career to embrace that experience and use it as an advantage. And I think it can be the same for others, whether you're in a position of leadership or not.
So, one of the things we do really, really, really well here is the employee resource groups that we have set up. I remember when Duval Miller called me to tell me he was setting up Beam, and I was incredibly flattered because he was asking my opinion on some things. And you head up a lot of these resource groups. So what are some of the best practices and recommendations for championing diversity within organizations if you're going to start to set these things up?
Sure. So first, I'm just going to spend a minute just bragging a little bit on our team at Lighthouse and and some of the employee resource groups that I lead. One is called Women Lead. It's Women Exploration and Development. The purpose of the group is to provide discussion, training, resources, networking opportunities for our women leaders here at Lighthouse. And then Beam that you mentioned that Duval helped spark is bridging eDiscovery and minorities. And the intent is similar. It's to facilitate interaction, organize activities that support racial and ethnic minorities in the workplace.
And by the way, those like Beam, for instance, I routinely go to those meetings, the virtual meetings that we have, and that is as diverse a group in there. It's not just ethnic and racial minorities in there. I mean, I'm there, Rob's there. There are people across the entire spectrum. That's one of the things that's so interesting about these groups is the people that sort of you would think that are involved in these organizations it's not limited to that group. It really does span the entire company joins these things.
It does, and it helps provide this kind of concept of allyship, which we've been talking a lot about within all of our groups. And there's so much connectivity between the groups. These are two that I lead. We've got a Lighthouse Pride group as well as a Lighthouse Families group. So there are others. But the one thing that I would say about the groups is this was not a top-down kind of decision. As you mentioned with Duval, he had this idea. He started to socialize it amongst others. So within the company, he eventually came to me and said, hey, we need an executive sponsor. Would you be open to that? I jumped on it and was able to help shape it. This Women Lead started before I joined, just slightly before I joined, but I think it was a similar type of initiative where we had an executive that got behind it, but there was a lot of interest from the rest of the group. And so I do think in terms of best practices, it has to be something that is organic and that is coming from the team. Actually, with Beam, even, Duval came to me and said, I want to start a group with, Black employees. And that was the initial thinking. And as we started talking more about it, it's like, but there are all these other minorities, and do we want to have it be more inclusive? And so making sure that you've got an idea, but that you're open to, and he was completely open to changing gears a little bit. And so I think it's working with the groups that want to bring this to the organization, but being flexible and really thinking about what do the members need and being as inclusive as possible, to your point, Bill, because if it's just us talking to each other, change isn't going to happen. If we're able to bring in others and open up the tent and have allies, hear some of the challenges and what we're facing, it just helps us all become better and a better organization for it.
And you're not kidding. I mean, you're not speaking just figuratively when you say this should be a bottom-up approach, because those of us that know Duval, he's 3.5 feet tall. So it literally is a bottom-up approach, that sort of originated. So anyway, I digress.
You just made a short joke. I'm short too, but it's okay.
I've been making short jokes about Duval for 15 years.
I wear 3-inch heels to make up for it.
So does he, by the way?
Yeah, and Stacey, I don't know if there's a greater, testament to the health of a company when it comes to diversity, when you can have ideas like that, roll up from the grassroots. I mean, and that's just half the equation. You have to also have management that sees that value.
That's right.
Accepts it and decides to, to push it from there. And when those two things happen together, it just creates something incredible that I've never seen better in an organization that I've been at than we have at Lighthouse, by far.
Yeah, I'm really proud of what we've done over the few years I've been here.
Well, Stacey, before we let you go, another question that we've really enjoyed this season, and in celebration of Women Histories Month, is we're asking each one of our guest speakers, what advice would you give to other women in the eDiscovery industry to help move their career forward?
So I have a few points here that I wanted to make. One is be authentic. Be your authentic self. And bring passion to whatever you do, whatever that is. And, if you have ideas within your organization, whether it's whatever the idea is, whether it's a spark around diversity or it's an eDiscovery idea, don't be afraid to share it and use your voice to speak. The other thing I would say that's been really helpful for me is to seek out and cultivate a relationship with a mentor or mentors. I've been fortunate to have a couple mentors that have been in my life for 25 years. And I just was talking to one of them the other day and just sharing how much he has shaped my career and life and been there for me. I think it's really important to have someone like that you can lean on and ask questions. And the other thing is, they say have confidence. I haven't always, and still today, there's the times when I don't have confidence. Having a mentor that can help give you that, the boost that you need. And what I said to him just recently was, he believed in me when sometimes I didn't feel like I believed in myself. So I think those are important things, to be vulnerable and have that mentor to help support you. And then the last thing I'd say is, don't expect perfection. You're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. The times that I've learned the most about myself and been able to push beyond have been when I've fallen down and had to get up and shake myself off and actually rise above where I was at before. So, and obviously leading with empathy. I said that earlier, but one more. Self-care. That's the last one. It's important to make sure you're taking care of yourself, because especially if you're leading teams, you can't do that if you are spent. So That would be my advice.
Stacey, this has been fantastic, as I think we all knew it would be. I'm going to try to summarize some of your genius into a few points here. First, diverse companies make better decisions, whether that's diversity around age, race, religion, sexual orientation, or diversity of experience and thought. Here we talked about some of the diversity that we have on the leadership team. We talked about some of the business studies that have come out to talk about how, whether it was the Harvard Business Study or McKinsey, talking about that companies are just more profitable. They're more successful when they have a more diverse team, and you attract that. It turns out, I think you said 2/3 of the people looking for jobs are looking for companies that are more diverse. And so once you develop that culture in-house, you start to attract people that are looking for it, which just makes it an even more diverse environment. We talked about some of the groups you set up, the bottom-up approach. This can't be a top-down approach. I think that's great. I love the story, Duval. I mean, he came to me as well, and I obviously came to you, and you okayed it. I love that. First, that we were at a company that fosters that sort of thinking and embraces it, and it is, you do see, especially like the years that the last 3 or 4 years, with all the country being so divided, you get on some of these calls and you hear different points of view, and it's not purely, I've been on those calls, and it's not purely a bunch of liberals sitting around and talking about. We some of the diversity is around political thought. I mean, we actually had some really strong conservatives on those calls, eloquently stating their positions on things, and everybody sort of embracing it. It wasn't that nobody was sitting at different lunch tables. It was very different than what we hear is going on at Thanksgiving tables around the country, because we have this open dialogue, and I think it's great. In terms of advice to women, I think all great points. Be authentic. Get a mentor that will help you develop your confidence and put you on the right track. Don't expect perfection, and be mindful of self-care. This was fantastic. I am so glad, as I know everybody else has at this company, that you decided to join Lighthouse rather than getting a restraining order against McManus. If those were the two choices, I think you made the right choice, and I think we all appreciate it. You're the best. We love working with you, but we really loved having you today. Really, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, folks, if you liked our show, actually, I take that back. Of course you loved our show. But show us some love by giving us a rating, Apple Podcasts or on Stitcher or whatever media that you're listening to this on. We'd love to get your feedback, and please subscribe for future shows. Thank you.